Ethan Gray stood on his back porch, coffee in hand. When he noticed something strange, his rake and shovel weren't where he left them. The tools had been leaned neatly against the shed wall last night after he spent the evening prepping his garden beds for spring. Now, the rake was half buried in the mulch pile, the shovel laying oddly across the rose bushes. And the shed door hung slightly ajar. He frowned. Ethan was meticulous, borderline obsessive about his yard. That was one reason he bought a house in Whispering Pines, a neighborhood known for its postcard-perfect lawns and HOA regulations that made even the pickiest neighbors feel at home. But something was off today. As he approached the shed, he noticed the padlock dangling from its latch unlocked, yet not broken. Had he forgotten to secure it? He doubted it. Still, nothing appeared stolen. His mower, bags of fertilizer, and stacked bins of tools were all there, untouched, still, ... It gnawed at him. He turned to inspect his outdoor security camera, the one pointed toward the Shaddan side. The lens was cracked clean through. No way, he muttered. He hadn't touched that camera in weeks. Was it an accident? A branch. In last night's windstorm, except the rest of the yard looked untouched. No debris. No signs of a storm tantrum. A tight feeling began to knot in his stomach. Later that morning, he booted up the home security app, hoping for at least some backup footage, but when he clicked the timestamp for the previous night, his screen read, "No data available." His brows furrowed. He scrolled back further. The last recorded video was from 2 nights ago. Everything after that blank. Deleted. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. If someone had tampered with the shed and the camera, it wasn't just trespassing. It was calculated, intentional. The fence gates were all locked. The front security system hadn't been triggered. Whoever had come through had known exactly how to avoid it. He walked the perimeter of the yard, heart thudding faster now, and finally stopped dead at a patch of freshly disturbed earth near the corner fence. There, sunk slightly into the muddy ground were 2 narrow, defined shoe prints. Ethan squatted down and eyed them carefully. Small, narrow feet. Tread marks from what looked like a women's walking shoe. Clean entry. No exit. Whoever it was, they came in and left the same way. Then something glinted from under the hedgerow nearby. He reached out and pulled it free. A small, golden pin. It was about the size of a quarter, dull with scratches. But as he wiped it with his sleeve, his stomach dropped. It was a metal name badge, the kind issued to HOA committee members. On it, printed in small black letters, Whispering Pines, K. Mitchell, Karen Mitchell. The HOA's Neighborhood Integrity Chair. A woman infamous for passive-aggressive complaint letters, rulebook recitations, and snapping pictures of minor violations with her ancient flip phone. And now, her badge was in his yard. Ethan stood there, holding it between his fingers, like a smoking gun. He didn't have proof yet, not visual, not concrete. But he had enough to know this wasn't an accident, and he had a plan forming already. He turned back to the house, eyes narrowing with quiet fury. If Karen Mitchell wanted to play dirty, she had just stepped into the wrong backyard. The next night, Ethan sat in his living room, eyes on his tablet as the live feed from his new hidden cameras flickered to life. He had installed them discreetly, one in the birdhouse overlooking the shed, another in the garden gnome facing the porch, and a third nestled inside the porch light, an expensive upgrade but worth every penny. He hadn't even told his friends. If Karen or anyone else was snooping, he needed to catch them unaware. At exactly 2:43 a.m., his phone buzzed. Motion detected backyard zone 3. He sat up straighter, tapped the notification, and the screen loaded live footage. There she was. A figure moved with surgical precision through the shadows. Her form cloaked in a long coat and a scarf covering most of her face. But the walk was unmistakable, brisk, businesslike. And far too confident for someone who didn't belong there. Karen Mitchell, she approached the shed. Pulling something from her coat, Ethan squinted at the screen. It was a flashlight, partially covered with red tape to dull the beam. She clicked it on, quickly scanning the side of the shed and surrounding grass. Then, just as fast, she squatted and began fiddling with the latch. Ethan's heart pounded. His instincts screamed to confront her, but he held back. The camera was rolling, audio was on, and he wanted more. Wanted to see exactly what she was after. She tugged the shed door open, just wide enough to peek in. Ethan leaned forward. Then Karen reached inside and grabbed a stack of paper from one of the storage bins. She flipped through them for a moment, then stuffed one sheet into her coat and carefully closed the door. What had she taken? Ethan's hands clenched into fists. The only papers in that bin were copies of his HOA correspondence violation notices, responses, and board emails he had printed and filed. She was after records. Why? Suddenly, Karen froze. She tilted her head as if hearing something. Her flashlight snapped off. She backed up quickly, nearly tripping over the rake she'd knocked over last time, and hurried toward the corner fence. Ethan tapped to switch camera views. She reached the same muddy spot as before and scaled the side with practiced ease. Gripping a post that now had a worn indentation from repeated use. She's done this before when she disappeared into the dark. Ethan exhaled. He had a crystal clear video of Karen Mitchell trespassing. Rifling through his belongings, taking papers, but as he went to save the footage, something gnawed at him. Why take an old email? He walked out in the morning and opened the shed. Bin was slightly askew. One paper was missing from the middle of the stack. He rummaged through and recognized what she'd taken. A printed email chain between Ethan and the HOA's former president about the committee budget review from last fall. He hadn't thought about it in months. His eyes narrowed. That budget meeting had been unusually vague. Karen had motioned for private executive decisions, an unusual, almost shady move that bypassed full community transparency. At the time, Ethan hadn't cared. Now it felt like a loose thread unraveling a secret. She couldn't afford to let go. As he returned to the house, he felt the shift not just in the weather or the wind. Something deeper. This wasn't a nosy neighbor on a power trip. This was a cover-up in progress. And Karen had just handed him his first real clue. At the monthly HOA meeting, Ethan sat near the back of the community center hall, arms folded. Trying not to glare at the woman standing so confidently up front, Karen Mitchell stood behind the microphone, giving her usual sugary sweet community beautification update. She praised the trimmed hedges on Maple Lane, thanked a neighbor for repainting their shutters, and complimented Ethan's effort in organizing his backyard space. That comment made a few heads turn toward him. She was subtle, but not enough. Ethan forced a smile. She was baiting him, trying to make him snap in front of the whole board. Not yet. He waited until open discussion. Then calmly stood up and raised a white envelope in his hand. "I'd like to submit a complaint," he said, his voice neutral. Karen's expression tightened for a fraction of a second before she recovered with a too bright smile. "We're always open to community input." Ethan walked to the front and handed the envelope to Mr. Halverson, the HOA president. "This contains screenshots and time-stamped video showing someone entering my yard without permission. Multiple times." A quiet murmur rolled through the room. Karen's jaw flexed. Halvorsen looked confused. "We'll review it with the committee in private. Was anything stolen?" "Not stolen," Ethan replied, locking eyes with Karen. "But I believe someone was searching for sensitive documents. HOA related." Karen spoke before Halvorsen could respond. "Excuse me, but I think we should be careful accusing people of serious things based on camera angles and shadows. I'm sure whoever it was had a reason, or maybe it's all a misunderstanding." The defensiveness in her voice caught some off guard. Few residents glanced between her and Ethan. "I didn't name anyone," Ethan said softly. Karen's cheeks turned slightly red. "We'll review the material and follow up if necessary." Halvorsen said quickly, "Meeting adjourned." The moment the gavel hit the desk, Karen stormed toward the hallway. Ethan stepped into her path before she could escape. "I want to talk," he said quietly, keeping his voice low. "I have nothing to say to you." Karen replied through clenched teeth, still smiling for the bystanders walking past. "You broke into my yard more than once." She leaned closer, whispering, "You think you're clever? But you have no idea what you're getting into." Ethan held up his phone. "It's the next time I hand over video, it's going to the sheriff's office." Karen's smile didn't break. "Then I hope you have a permit for those shed modifications. And those unapproved security lights." She patted him on the arm. "Some of us actually follow the rules." Then she turned and walked out, heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. By the time Ethan returned home, 3 violation slips were already shoved into his mailbox. Unapproved exterior fixtures, unauthorized shed expansion, decorative garden infringement. Each notice dated 2 days earlier before the HOA meeting. His blood boiled. It wasn't just intimidation. This was retaliation, premeditated and immediate. But as he pulled the last notice from the mailbox, something else caught his attention. An envelope tucked at the back, yellowed and torn. It was addressed to a name he didn't recognize: Lydia Carson, former homeowner of Ethan's house. Inside was a folded letter. It read, "If she's been in your yard too, don't trust the committee. They covered it up for her once. Don't let them do it again." Ethan stared at the paper, his heart pounding. He wasn't the first target, and Karen had made one fatal mistake, thinking no one was watching anymore. Ethan stared at the old letter from Lydia Carson for a long time that night. The warning felt urgent, like someone whispering through time, "Don't trust the committee." They covered it up for her once. He placed the letter beside his laptop and began formulating a plan. Karen was clever, yes, but predictable. She came after dark, avoided main entry points, and left almost no trace. But now he knew what she was after: records. Anything tying her to shady HOA dealings, so he gave her something worth stealing. The next morning, he planted a decoy folder inside the shed. It's clearly labeled Private HOA. Meeting notes plus legal options inside were convincing replicas, mock emails, printed legal phrases, and one particularly juicy line: "Funds moved off books to avoid committee approval." None of it was real. He installed 2 more high-definition night vision cameras, one hidden in a decorative bird feeder, and another buried inside a solar-powered light aimed at the shed. By sunset, the trap was set, and Ethan waited. At 1:12 a.m., the alert buzzed. He didn't even flinch this time. He was ready. Karen was back. The camera feed showed her creeping through the yard in the same long coat, her flashlight beam weaker than before. She scanned the area carefully, lingering at the new solar light, but ultimately dismissed it. She went straight to the shed. Ethan leaned forward, watching in absolute silence. She knelt at the door, quietly opened it, and immediately spotted the folder. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled it out. She read each page quickly, her lips moving soundlessly. And then she whispered aloud, "He knows." She rifled through the rest of the folder, clearly panicking. Her composure cracked. Karen began flipping through pages faster, pulling some out, stuffing them in her coat, then replacing the rest sloppily. That was when Ethan pressed a button on his phone. A voice boomed from a hidden speaker. "Inside the shed, you're being recorded on 5 angles. Leave now or wait for the police." Karen let out a startled yelp, dropping the folder. She stumbled backward, smacking into the garden bench. Her flashlight flew from her hand and she scrambled to grab it, failing twice before finally getting to her feet. "Who's there?" she yelled, her voice tight with panic. "This is harassment. You're violating HOA statutes." Ethan didn't respond. He let the silence hang. Karen stood frozen for a moment, then turned and ran. She bolted toward the same fence corner she always used, but in her haste, she slipped on the slick mud and fell face first into the flower bed. The camera caught it all. She eventually pulled herself up, covered in mulch, cucked, and climbed over the fence like a burglar caught red-handed. Ethan watched the screen for a moment longer, then hit save on the full footage and transferred it to 3 backup drives. The trap had worked. But as he shut down the monitor, something unnerved him. Karen hadn't just wanted the documents, she seemed desperate. Desperate enough to risk exposure. Desperate enough to call it harassment when she was the one trespassing, which meant she wasn't alone in this. The next morning, as Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee, a black SUV idled slowly past his house. It had no plates, and it passed by again 10 minutes later. 2 days after the incident, Ethan was deep into editing the security footage when a knock rattled his front door. 3 hard pounds. He stood up slowly, already feeling that something was off. When he opened the door to uniformed sheriffs, deputies stood on his porch. "Ethan Gray," one asked, flipping open a notepad. "Yes. A member of your HOA board." Ethan blinked, stunned for only a second, then his jaw clenched. "Karen called the cops on me." Deputy Ortiz raised an eyebrow. "So you do know Ms. Mitchell?" "Oh, I know her," Ethan muttered. "Did she tell you she's been sneaking into my backyard at night?" "I have videoed dozens of clips. She broke into my shed. She stole documents." Lang kept a neutral face. "She claims you installed invasive surveillance equipment aimed at her property. She also says you threatened her with violence over an HOA dispute." Ethan's eyes widened. "I have everything documented, video footage, timestamps, even a letter from the previous homeowner warning me about her." Ortiz gently nodded. "That's good. We're not here to press charges yet, but we do need to take a statement." Ethan invited them inside, pulled up the footage, and walked them through each clip. Karen sneaking in, stealing the folder, falling in the garden. He even showed the hidden speaker message and how it was triggered after she opened the shed. Lang's demeanor shifted, and she never had permission to be here. Not once. "Mind if we take a copy?" Ethan handed over a flash drive. As they left, Lang gave a long, tired sigh. "You'd be surprised how many of these HOA disputes get ugly. But this ... this one smells off." "What do you mean?" Lang hesitated. "You didn't hear it from me, but her call wasn't the only one. He had a sealed file about her from 6 years ago. Another neighbor made similar claims." That case got buried. Ethan's stomach sank. The deputies left, but the tension didn't. He knew what was coming next. Karen was going to escalate. That night, he couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., he walked into his kitchen to grab water and paused. His motion sensor had been tripped. He checked the cameras. Nobody was in the yard, but his side gate was wide open. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, cautiously. The wind rustled the trees, and the moon hung low. No movement. No sound. Then he noticed something wedged under his doormat. A sealed envelope. Inside was a single photo, a grainy, black and white image of Ethan from earlier that day talking to the deputies on his porch. On the back of the photo, in blocky red ink, was a note. "Next time, they won't just talk." Ethan looked up, eyes scanning the rooftops, the tree lines, the shadows between the fences. This wasn't just Karen anymore. Someone else was involved. Someone who didn't want the truth coming out. And he had just become a target. Ethan spent the next morning scouring every inch of his house for clues. If someone had taken that photo of him with the deputies, they were watching from somewhere close, possibly even inside the neighborhood. But who? Karen may have been the face of the threat, but she wasn't working alone. That photo, that warning, it was a message from someone with more reach, more reason to shut Ethan down. He remembered the letter from Lydia Carson, the former homeowner. Her warning hadn't just been paranoia, it had been a breadcrumb. And Ethan finally decided to follow it. He pulled the county records and tracked Lydia down within the hour. She now lived 30 miles away in a retirement condo. Her name on the door was faint but still legible. She answered after the second knock. Lydia Carson, Ethan asked, her face tightened. You live in my old house, don't you? I do. I need your help. It's about the HOA. About Karen. She didn't respond, just stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. The place was modest. Dusty with time, but peaceful. She handed him a cup of tea like she'd been expecting this conversation for years. I warned you in that letter, she said. So it's happening again. What is happening? Who else is involved? Lydia sighed, then opened a small lockbox from a hallway closet and pulled out a faded manila folder. Everything started with a landscaping project. Ethan frowned. Landscaping? 7 years ago, the HOA allocated over $85,000 for a community beautification overhaul. Karen pushed for it hard, said it would raise property values. We approved it, but the job was never done. Not completely. Ethan leaned in. Where did the money go? No one knows. And when I started asking questions, someone broke into my shed, stole my files. 2 days later, I was fined for violating patio design rules that didn't exist. The board pressured me until I sold the house and left. She handed Ethan a sheet of paper. A receipt from a landscaping firm with the top line scratched out, and an address on the bottom. Ethan read it. It wasn't the HOA's address, it was Karen's. You think she funneled the money to herself? He asked. I know she did, Lydia whispered. And I think she used friends on the board to help hide it. Some of them still live there. Ethan felt the chill crawl down his spine. They're watching me. I got a photo of myself printed and hand-delivered. Someone's got surveillance gear. Lydia stared at him for a long moment. There's an attic space above your shed, she said suddenly. I had it reinforced when I was hiding files. There might be something I left behind, something I missed. Ethan stood. Thank you. As he turned to leave, Lydia grabbed his arm. Be careful. Karen doesn't panic unless she's cornered. When Ethan returned home, it was just past sunset. He wasted no time, grabbed a flashlight, climbed into the shed, and felt along the upper beams until he found the lip of a hatch in the ceiling. He pried it open. A small dust-covered box sat tucked in the corner. Inside were faded folders, water-stained notes, and one USB stick. He pocketed the drive, locked the shed, and walked back inside. But as he stepped through his kitchen door, he froze. His dining room window was wide open. A breeze fluttered the curtain, and sitting on his table was a second photo, this time of Lydia. Handing him the manila folder. On the back was a new note. She talks. She disappears. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The photo of Lydia. But because it proved someone had been inside his home, no broken locks. No tripped alarms. Someone had keys, or worse, access no one was supposed to have. He sat in the glow of his laptop, the USB drive plugged in, worry softly. At first, the folder seemed ordinary. Tax documents, project outlines, meeting minutes. Then he found a subfolder titled Aries Project, Personal Use Only. He clicked it open. Inside were dozens of PDFs and scanned invoices. The file showed payments made to a private contractor under a fake name, K. Marsh. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Marsh, Karen Mitchell's maiden name. It was on her old voter registration card, the one Lydia had filed in her folder. One receipt stood out. A $17,000 transfer labeled Perimeter Surveillance Install on Community Board Homes Only. Surveillance. Ethan's stomach turned. It highlighted homes in red. Lydia's former home, now his, the house of the former treasurer who'd suddenly moved away midterm. And the home of a man who'd gone missing after publicly accusing the HOA of embezzlement. The same man who'd once lived directly across from Karen. A note attached read, "Keep all audio off-grid. Any traceable hardware must be removed every 3 weeks." Ethan sat back in his chair, breathless. This wasn't just petty corruption. It was organized surveillance and intimidation. Saved backups to 3 cloud locations and printed hard copies of the most damning pieces. He stored them inside a waterproof envelope and slipped it into the storm drain behind his backyard under a rock he'd marked earlier. By morning, he had a plan. He walked to the sheriff's department. He met again with Deputy Lang. As soon as Ethan mentioned the phrase surveillance on board homes, Lang stiffened. "I've seen this before," Lang said. 3 years ago, a homeowner from a different county came forward with something similar. Case went nowhere. Disappeared. "Who handled that case?" Ethan asked. Lang's jaw worked. "Someone above my pay grade." He copied the USB and took Ethan's sworn statement. "We'll open a formal investigation quietly." By the time Ethan drove back home, he felt something he hadn't in weeks. Hope. Until he turned onto his street, red and blue lights danced across his driveway. 2 patrol cars. One HOA board member standing out front, Linda Torrance, the HOA secretary, and Karen. Arms crossed, lips smug. Ethan parked. "What now?" he demanded. Linda held out a paper. "Due to multiple violations, false harassment claims, an unauthorized recording of board members, your residency privileges are being reviewed." Karen smiled. "We're voting to evict you, Ethan, for the safety of the neighborhood." Ethan stared at them. "You're bluffing." "That's not legal," Karen leaned in. "Neither is leaking HOA financial data. You may want to get a lawyer before you talk to the press." That's when Ethan noticed something behind Karen. The same black SUV from before engine. The accusation of leaking financial data wasn't just a bluff. It was a trap. Karen was trying to flip the script, make him the criminal, distract from the surveillance, the theft, the trespassing. And now, with Linda Torrance at her side and that black SUV lurking behind them like a loyal watchdog, Ethan knew this went beyond just power, it was control. But he wasn't the same man who first moved into this house. He had something they did, single quotes, TDO, and backups. Ethan gave no reaction. He simply nodded, turned his back on them, and closed the door slowly, calmly, inside. He reached for his phone and made the final move. He uploaded the key evidence, video footage of Karen trespassing. Financial records of the embezzled landscaping project. Blueprints of the surveillance system, even the map of targeted homes. Then he emailed it to 3 groups. A local journalist, who'd once published a front-page expose on HOA corruption. The sheriff's internal affairs division. Every resident in the HOA directory. He hit send. And then he waited. For 30 minutes. Silence. Then his phone buzzed once. Twice, nonstop. Dozens of messages from neighbors. Words like, "What the hell, Karen did this? I knew something was off." And finally, "We're calling an emergency vote." Ethan stepped out on his porch just as the first storm cloud rolled overhead. Karen was standing by the black SUV. Linda Torrance was pacing in circles, waving her arms. Then a neighbor, Mr. Lee Dougal, marched across the lawn. "We saw it all," Dougal growled, holding his tablet up. "The emails, the receipts." "You lied to us, Karen." Karen tried to deny it. "You don't understand the context." "Oh, we understand perfectly." Someone shouted from another yard. Within the hour, neighbors gathered at the park clubhouse. By 5 p.m., the emergency meeting was underway, complete with shouting, phone calls, and a recorded Zoom feed for transparency. Ethan watched from the back. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to defend herself. Kate blamed contractors, former treasurers, even Lydia Carson. But every defense was countered with cold evidence. The vote was swift, public, brutal. 7-1, Karen was removed from the board. Linda Torrance tried to claim she was manipulated, but the residents voted her out too, as the black SUV drove off. Ethan caught a glimpse of the driver. It was the same man from the landscaping invoices, the one paid under a fake company name. She wasn't just stealing. She was working with someone capable of planting surveillance, silencing critics, and making people disappear. But not anymore. That night, the county sheriff's office confirmed that an official criminal investigation had begun. Ethan gave them everything, including the hidden drive he had stashed under the storm drain. Lydia was placed under protection, and the neighborhood. It changed. Residents began organizing a new board. One without secrets, without silent intimidation. Ethan was offered a leadership role, but he politely declined. He'd had enough shadows. Weeks later, as he sat on his back porch with a fresh cup of coffee, he received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a small card inside it read, "You lit a fire you can't control." Kaboot, he smiled anyway, because this time the whole world had matches.